The week started off with some rare good news from the jail when public advocate Jumaane Williams, Comptroller Brad Lander, and Councilwoman Carlina Rivera made an unannounced visit to get an update on conditions. All three noted improvements, but acknowledged there's still a long way to go, especially when it comes to staffing.
One of the first conversations we had was with the corrections officer, who said very, very plainly that nobody is showing up to work.
But then, days later, tragedy on the island. Another inmate died in custody. 40-year-old Michael Nieves had been at the jail since early June, and now 3 correction officers are suspended for allegedly failing to act as Nieves took his own life, proving the work to improve the jail is far from over. This morning, New York City public advocate Jumaane Williams goes on the record. Mr. Williams, thank you so much for joining us this morning. How are you?
I'm hanging in. Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure.
Well, let's start with what's happening on Rikers Island. This past week, we saw another death at the jail. Right now, we're on pace to surpass the numbers of deaths that we saw last year. In this most recent incident, there are reports that it took 10 minutes for the correction officers to act. So, public advocate, how can we stop this from happening again?
You know, obviously, there's no one that can listen to these stories and say that it's acceptable. The 13th death, as you mentioned, seemingly will surpass last year's. As you know, myself, Comptroller Lander, and Councilmember Rivera did a visit to Rikers. And while we saw that it wasn't the complete, utter failure it was in September, we noted that it wasn't anywhere close to where it needed to be for it to be a safe place for anyone to be housed there or even to work there. And lo and behold, not a couple of days after, we found out another person, Mr. Nieves, who was simply awaiting trial. That's what I think most people need to remember. People are awaiting trial, committed suicide. Now, there are correction officers who are trying their best to make that place be a place that people can be safe in. And then there are others who stand by and watch people dying. This is not the first or second time. And it's something that we just cannot accept. And it's the height of unacceptability.
So, public advocate, is this an issue of training? Are the correction officers properly trained to handle these intense situations like what happened with Mr. Nieves?
Well, one, they should be. I don't know how much training you need to intervene. So it's hard to say if the training was inadequate. It may have been just those particular people who were there. But what we do know is whatever reforms are happening not happening fast enough or being bold enough for it to have protected Mr. Nieves or the 12 other people that died. We do know we have to move forward very quickly to continue the plan to shut down Rikers, but we want to make sure we're not bringing the culture that's there to the smaller jails that will be put in place. What we're seeing now is still a crisis, and we have to be clear about that.
I want to talk a bit more about that surprise visit that you made to Rikers this week with the Comptroller, Councilwoman Rivera. I know you've been to Rikers several times over the last few years. We were both a part of the same visit there just before the start of the pandemic. Can you go into more detail in terms of what you saw during this visit compared to some of the previous visits?
You know, it's sad that we have to compare it to where we were in September, because that bar was so low. It's hard to explain how bad it was in September. But in comparing to that low bar, where it was just simply on the brink of complete and utter dysfunction, we had to admit that it was not there when we saw it in September. But we were very clear that we still were not where we needed to be. And we didn't even know at that point, which is very disappointing because the DOC had known that someone had tried to commit suicide. They knew what happened and they withheld that information from us. And we still saw people not getting the medication that they should receive. We saw people still not getting to their medical appointments the way they should be. We did see some people being held, and I have to admit, at least it was fewer than before, being held in isolation in a way that could be damaging. Some of the other solitary cells, quote unquote, were being administered in a better way according to people who were there, according to people who were housed there. But obviously, there's still huge problems that are not being addressed.
There has been this plan that's been discussed over the last few years to close Rikers, open up these smaller borough-based jails. Is that plan still viable? Do you support that plan, considering that the jail population has grown, over the last year or so?
Of course I support it, and many people should support it. what is happening on Rikers is a part of function of the structure physically, and also how we treat the atmosphere at Rikers Island. We have to change that, and we have to get folks closer to home, where they can be more closely connected with families, out of sight, out of mind. And I think that's actually for the people who are housed there, of course, and the people who work there, who many people don't mention, usually come from the same neighborhoods. And I think if either one of those things weren't true, we wouldn't be dealing with some of the issues that we're dealing with. Two things I always want to mention is that 60% of the people on Rikers have mental health crisis. Many of them are acute, and everyone agrees they shouldn't be on Rikers. It's not a place to get well. And second is, for all the talk of bail, where there's been no evidence saying that that is the driver of crime, we need to be talking about getting people their court dates so they can be heard. And there are ways that we can do that expeditiously and quickly and lower the population at Rikers Island.
Well,
and that's where we can spend a lot of our time.
And that leads me right to my next question. What are some concrete steps that the city can take to help reduce that inmate population on Rikers?
Well, we did see some people starting to come back to work, which is good. When I was in September, we saw folks, correction officers who were working quadruples and triples. That was just unsustainable. They're now down to about doubles, and doubles are regular. Although we did speak to some folks who still want to get into meal breaks, which is a problem. So we have to continue to make sure the staffing is the way it needs to be. We do have to continue to decarcerate. We have to stop believing to just putting people in a cage while they wait for up to 8 years to have their trial is keeping anyone safe. And so we have to continue to decarcerate and get folks to their hearings and their court dates and their trials much quicker than we are right now. And we have to get people who need mental health assistance off of that island.
And Mr. Williams, I also want to discuss gun violence for a short time here. Times Square became a gun-free zone this week. Do you think this will help alleviate some of the fears over safety in the city, especially after the repeal of the city's concealed carry laws?
We have to be clear, more guns equals more death, and that is a problem. And we have a supply problem of guns coming into our city, and we have a demand problem of people using those guns. And we have to have a plan for both of those. And my hope is that designating some of these areas as sensitive. I'm proud to be one of the co-sponsors on that bill, and I'm very proud of the City Council for moving quickly to have a hearing on it. And I'm proud of the state, the legislature, and even the governor for moving swiftly to try to get this done. But there's a lot more that we have to do. I do want to say we have to have a conversation that deals with the real trauma that people are facing in this city and being killed and what comes with that, and also understanding that this is a national problem. That is even worse in other places. And of course, that means nothing if you're a victim of crime. But we have to have those conversations.
Mr. Williams, my final question. You stood with the mayor and the comptroller this week to talk about credit card companies and their role in tracking gun purchases. So what are the next steps in making that a reality?
You know, the credit card companies have to answer the question of why do they do not want a specific code that tracks guns. They have a code for everything else. So we're not even asking them to create an entirely new system, but we're asking them to create something that will track the sales of guns so we can find out if there's something that will lead us to believe that people are illegally losing guns, quote unquote, that are ending up on our streets or are about to commit a mass shooting. And the next step is to continue to put pressure on that. You know, celebrate the comptroller and all the others who were leading on this issue. But this is one of those things where it's a no-brainer. And if you have a system that's already in place that can help people be accountable and help be transparent, there's no reason why we won't do it. And that would help a lot with the supply side of gun violence.
New York City Public Advocate Jumaane Williams, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you as always.